you felt cheated, you know?
Well, I felt cheated in two ways. First of all, I felt cheated in the sense that what I learned as a kid turned out to be not true, that my country can be wrong. So I felt cheated that way. I also felt cheated with what I felt was tremendous waste of lives. Unlike other wars where you go in and gain so much ground, Vietnam, we would go in, we would fight, and then we would withdraw. And all these lives being wasted, both American and Vietnamese lives, I began to feel cheated then that if we're here to win this war, why are we doing these type of things? Why aren't we winning it? I felt cheated in the sense that some of the battles I was in, I would pick up the Stars and Stripes, which was the newspaper in Vietnam, and read about this battle, and they were saying we had light casualties, and half my company got wiped out. I felt cheated in the sense that there was no sense to the whole thing. There was no reasoning behind it. It was just destructive waste of life. When you have a society that creates things like free fire zones, where anything that lives in that zone is fair game, when you have a society that invents plastic pellets that cannot show up in x-rays, when you have a society that is where you are taught that these people you are fighting are non-human, that they are gooks, slopids, then you have a sick society. And I believed in America from the beginning. I believed that my country was perfect, that it was our job to go over and to defend other people. It was our job to show the world, quote, how to do the right thing. What I found out from the Vietnamese people is that America can be wrong. I felt cheated that way. But I still feel myself being very patriotic because I still love my country today. Except I want my country to be, quote, what it says it is in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. I feel cheated in that sense, both morally and physically cheated. One of the things I felt cheated about when I came home was the inability to be able to run with my children because physically I got shot through my knee and I have a bad leg. And I felt cheated in that sense. That's not to say if it were a just war, which I don't feel any war is just today. That's not to say that it would be easier to live. Where you feel cheated is that you know those Americans died over there, died for nothing. You know the Americans that came back and the treatment they got was for nothing. You feel cheated in this way. You feel cheated in the sense that here you have given your all. You have given everything, including your blood. And you come back to a country that's corrupt. You come back to a country that treats its veterans as if they were throwaway garbage. You come back to a country that's still lying to create more Vietnams. I feel cheated that way. I feel cheated because I see a new generation of Americans going into the service, not understanding, not being able to question why. I feel cheated that way because I feel this generation, especially from the experience of Vietnam veterans, needs to question their country. My generation never questioned our country, and I feel this generation needs to. That's how I feel cheated. I feel cheated that the whole experience in Vietnam, in the school system, is nothing, is not taught, is glorified. I feel cheated that way. That our country glorifies war, and no war is glorification. I still have feelings of pride that I want my country to be right. I still have feelings of pride that my country has accomplished a lot. At the same time, I feel cheated because all this technology that my country developed is not being used for the good of mankind. I think it's still being used for war and destruction, and that's where I feel cheated. You've got to understand is I've made promises to dead people that this would never happen again. And when a new generation does not go out and start seeing what happened over there, 20 years later, 30 years later, we are going to create the same type of situation. More people are going to go in, more people are going to die, more people back here, the big wigs will make a lot of money, and for what? For what? I feel cheated that way.
So in a way it was like to wake up from the American dream.
Yes. I think for me, Vietnam was the shattering of the American dream. That I totally believed in the American dream. That in some extent I still believe in the American dream. But the Vietnam experience itself, especially if you were a white male that fought over there, I think for us that was the shattering of the American dream. I think if you were Latino or black over there and fought, it wasn't that type of shattering that it did for the white person, because that black person or that Latin person grew up in a society that was racist to begin with. For the American white male, our American dream was to go into the service to better ourselves. Our American dream was that my country couldn't do any wrong. And for that, from that experience, that American dream was shattered. And when any dream is shattered, I think you have a sense of being cheated, a sense of loss.
Let me ask you something else. As you were saying before, you went to war, okay? Because you felt that you have a duty, that your generation had a duty.
Yes.
I mean, probably you were thinking also about the war as the war that your family was, or your father was telling you, I mean, the Second World War, and also the idea of the war that you had from the movies.
Mm-hmm.
What the reality of war?
The reality of war is that once you get shot in a real war, you don't get up as you do in the movies and make another movie. The reality of war is when you step on a landmine. I remember the first guy I ever treated was an 18, 19-year-old Marine, and he had stepped on a landmine. And I ran up to him, and he said, "Doc, Doc, I'm going to live, ain't I?" And I remember him dying, and I remember me crying, and I remember me crying at the next one, and I remember me crying at the next one, till I got to a point where for me to cry, for me to feel anymore, would have meant my own survival. So I had to shut down all my emotions. I felt cheated that way. Where you have kids screaming for their moms as they're dying, that's the reality of war. Where you have people that are maimed for life, that are psychologically damaged for life, that's the reality of war. War's not pretty. War's not a glorification. And I feel that's what people need to look at. I feel even today with the movies coming out, even the movie Born on the 4th of July, which I just saw, there's still parts of that glorify war. And I feel that war does not need to be glorified.
What were you told before going to Vietnam? What they taught you?
They taught me to believe in my country, that if my country called me, to go. They taught me that we were the best country in the world, that we were in fact superior, the most superior country in the world, and that it was our duty to take this throughout the world. They taught me that it was okay to fight. What they didn't teach me, that once you fought, a lot of your feelings would die inside you and it would take a long time for these feelings to come back. What they didn't teach me, that once you got wounded, it was for life and not just for that period of the war you were in. What they didn't teach me is that children today don't understand that. I feel it's my generation that fought the war. It is my generation's duty, as it was my duty to go then. My duty now is to tell people to question why. That's the legacy that I feel that I have to leave to my children. To not buy anything at face value anymore, to question why. That way, I think it will appease within my own soul my feelings of what I did in Vietnam.
My question was what they taught you before send you there from a technical point of view? You know, before they call you back and say, now you have to go to Vietnam. You know, before send you there, what kind of training?
Oh, I had very good training in the medical field, although it was very intensive. At this time, when I went through medical training, there was no war. Quote, it was not a big thing. So I had extensive training for a long, long time. They taught me everything of how to suture somebody. I performed on the battlefield what they call tracheotomies to sewing people right on the battlefield. I felt my medical training was very good. The problem was that there was not enough of us. I was there during the year of the heaviest fighting, the Tet Offensive of 1968. I was with the Marine Company that we retook Way, and we had a lot of casualties. A lot of medics were being wounded or killed themselves, so we didn't have enough medics to go around. The other training was the first time I went through Marine Corps training. I learned how to shoot a weapon, both a .45 and an M1. The second time, when I got called back in, I refused to pick up a weapon. So I got a lot of hassle from people that way, you know. I also was taught, I remember the second time going through this, quote, mini Marine boot camp, what they call Field Medical Service School. We had an Asian fellow with us, and him being brought up in front of the company, and they said, this is what a gook looks like. This is what your enemy looks like. And here this person was American. So I imagine what he felt, being up there in front of all these people. They taught me how to be racist, which is something that I felt my family at least didn't teach me. They taught me how to be racist in the sense that these people we were fighting, they were always subjected to being, you were told that they were non-human. You were told that their value of life wasn't the same as yours. You were told that these people didn't really care. And yet, when I went to Vietnam, I felt that those people cared just as much about their sons and daughters as we felt about ours. I was taught that war was right. That's what I was taught. And all throughout my training, from day one when I joined the Navy, all through my medical training, through Field Service Corps training, through advanced infantry training, I was taught war was right. And that's a belief system that, in a way, I went to Vietnam with, even though I didn't carry a weapon. I still wanted to see if I could make it, if I could face combat and do my job without being a coward or without freezing under fire. And I proved to myself that I could do that, but to what avail? To what avail? I feel the other thing that I was taught was, now that I can question. That's, to me, that's the most important lesson. That now I can question, that I will never buy anything face value again that my country has told me.
Would you like a coffee?
Yes.
What about fear? You know.
Fear?
What?
I'm not laughing at the question. I feel it's... fear can be very addictive in a way. That adrenaline rush that you get, which is brought on by fear, is a feeling I've never experienced before in my life, or after, since I went to Vietnam, since I've been home. In fact, my first few months back in the United States, I would go down to the Tenderloin area of San Francisco, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, to walk around just to feel that adrenaline rush again. Fear can be an aphrodisiac. I mean, what fear does to you, all your senses become so vivid and so real. Your sense of smell, you have a sixth sense of looking at things. And I think this is because of your survival instinct. And I think fear kept some people alive. I mean, you have to look at fear for what it is. Fear made me not take stupid chances. Fear also made me take some risk. There's a difference between risk and stupid chances. I know today I don't have any fear of dying. That doesn't faze me. I have a fear that it's going to happen again. That bothers me, that we haven't learned. But fear is, the first time I was in combat and shot at, I literally pissed my pants. That's how afraid I was. But I kept going and kept going because I felt I had to do that. So, and it wasn't as much as that I wanted to, it was that I didn't want people to consider me a coward. So that feeling overrode the fear. Even though I was very afraid of being hurt or being killed, I had to go out and continue what I was doing because I didn't want people to think I couldn't hack it or couldn't make it.
Is it fear that sometimes makes soldiers to shoot your own?
Yes.
Okay. Can you say something about it?
I have seen experiences where Americans have killed other Americans through fear. This is because you have to understand that once you're in combat, if you hear a noise, you're going to turn around and spray that area. And I've seen our own people shoot our own people because of fear of being hurt themselves. But I don't think this is, I think this is true in every war, that happens. Fear makes you do things that you're ashamed of doing also. I know that right before I left Vietnam, I was so afraid of being hurt that we had gone into a ville. We were sweeping the ville. We got opened up on, and we returned fire ourselves, and some women and children were hurt. And I had 2 weeks less to go, and I hid behind a rock because I was not going to go out to that battle zone. And I'm very ashamed of that today, but fear made me do that, that I did not want to expose myself. I had had enough by that time.
Did you realize during that time, that, no, let's put it in another way, how the Army teach you to kill other human beings? I mean,
First of all, they teach you that these other people are not human beings, that their quality of life is not the same as yours. Therefore, they are not human beings. You kill because you don't want to be killed yourself. And it's easier to kill somebody if that person is not considered human. So psychologically, you are prepared that these people are animals. You are taught that they are not human. So you will kill them. And you will kill them any way you can. And the more that you kill of them, the better it is supposedly for you. That's your training.
And what happened to your brain, to your mind, when you start killing people? I mean, what happened to your friends?
The people that I killed were Americans. I didn't kill any Vietnamese. I didn't carry a weapon. But I did kill Americans because we had people wounded sometimes during the middle of the night, especially with a gut wound that I know would suffer all night. We couldn't get them a medevac out of there. And I OD'd them on morphine. I killed them myself with morphine. And I don't think any of them would have made it, but it still doesn't feel good with me today. Sometimes I look at their faces. Sometimes they ask me to do it. Sometimes I did it on my own because I didn't want to see them suffer, and I knew they wouldn't. I felt that they wouldn't live throughout the night. So my killing, if you want to say it's mercy killing, I don't consider it mercy killing. I think killing's killing, period. But my killing was killing of other Americans. And I feel cheated that I had to do that.
During the Second World War, there were a lot of racism too against the Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
The Japanese have been portrayed since the beginning people were able to live in the Pacific area, in the jungle,
Mm-hmm.
and they were comfortable in the jungle. They were like monkeys,
Mm-hmm.
like the Indians in this country. They were part of the landscape. As you were saying, it's more easy to keep people when they are animals.
When they are animals,
Subhuman.
when they're subhuman, when you destroy their culture. One of the things that we did in Vietnam was we would take people, and you have to realize that the Vietnamese people believe in ancestral worship, which means that their land and their ancestors, where they're buried, that is their ground. That is where they stay. What we did in Vietnam is we gathered people from these small villages, put them into what we called relocation zones. What we did is we ripped them off of their culture. We relocated them from where they had been living for thousands and thousands of years, where their belief system was in that land, where it was handed down from generation to generation to generation. And we destroyed that land, plus we removed these people from it, and we couldn't understand why later they had such a resentment against us. We couldn't understand why we would, why they would look at us with hatred. What happens when you have a truckload of Marines going down the road, taking hard cans of food and seeing the Vietnamese children begging for this food, and people actually throwing this as hard as they could, trying to score a hit to hurt one of these kids? I mean, what kind of behavior is that? And the reason we did that type of behavior was, again, we were taught that these people were not human.
Well, I was telling you about racism and the Second World War. The Army was forced during the Second World War to send a note, to send, how do you say, an information note, Jeffrey?
Propaganda?
No. The Marines in the Pacific, they were sending souvenirs home.
Oh, we did that.
And these souvenirs were piece of the body of the Japanese. Okay?
We had in Vietnam Marines that would cut off the ears of the people they killed and would make necklaces out of these ears and wear these ears around their neck on this necklace until they actually rotted off. We desecrated dead bodies. That's not to say that the Vietnamese didn't do it to us also. But it was very common in the Marine Corps. We would leave, say, a calling mark, a card or something. We would torture people. We would take people up in helicopters. We'd have maybe 5 Vietnamese that were suspected Viet Cong or NVA, and we would take 5 of these people up in a helicopter, and I actually saw this happen, where we would ask the first one to give us information. He wouldn't give us information. We'd throw him out of the helicopter. Eventually, one of them would give us information. Again, this is because our belief system was that these people weren't human. That was racist. There also was racism within the American Army itself. You had a lot of the blacks and other veterans of color. The majority of them were on the front line with the poor white. They made up a larger majority of the casualties and the people killed. That was racism. In the back, in the field, in my grunt company, grunt meaning combat company, we were infantry company, there was no racism in the field. We came back from the bush, we came back to what they call a sit-down or a stand-down area. There would be Confederate flags flying. The blacks would congregate one place, the Latins another place, the whites another place. We had what we call the juicers and the heads. The juicers were the older guys that used to drink all the time, and the heads were the younger guys that we used to smoke a lot of pot and do other drugs right in Vietnam.
What about the behavior and the relationship between soldiers and the top brass, the bureaucracy in the army?
You have to understand that Vietnam was in actuality 3 wars. You had, when the first troops went over in 64, 65, where America still believed in it. my war was during 67, we'd say from 67 to 69, where back home, we began to question the war. The latter part of the war, 71 up to 75, is where you would have whole companies of men refusing to fight, basically saying, we're not going to go. We're not going out there. But I lost the trend of your question, I'm sorry.
No, I was saying, which one was the behavior of the top class, the bureaucracy, you know, the high level in the army?
Vietnam was the first war that invented a word called fragging. Fragging was when you had an officer or a non-commissioned officer that was giving you a lot of, quote, shit, that either put your life in jeopardy by stupidity or harassed you when you were not fighting. And a lot of these people were killed by their own people. There was a basic mistrust of your higher authority in Vietnam, in the field itself. If your officer was good, your platoon commander was good, he went along with the men. He could not give, quote, orders, okay, let's go in here and do this and do that, because he's not going to make it himself. And the ones that made it learned that very quickly. There were fraggings over there. They especially happened in the rear. After you've been in combat, you come back, you want to just relax. You don't want to have to put up with a lot of crap. There was a basic mistrust because we felt that the higher authorities were lying to us. We knew what was going on, and yet we would be fed this other story. Again, this would be like my company took light casualties when half my company was wiped out. And this is what was told to the general public at large, you know, by higher authorities. So there was a basic mistrust of higher authorities. It was ironic when we would come back from the field, there was this place called China Beach, which is right outside of Da Nang. And here would be all these officers living in air-conditioned huts and sort of houses where they had cold beer all the time, where they had clubs that they could go to, where they had steak every night, where we were in the bush eating whatever we could get our hands on, basically. So there was a lot of mistrust, because the technology that kept the war going also provided a lot of comfort for people that was not actually fighting. So you saw that dichotomy almost of here these people were, you know, living in the rear, with living a life of leisure, when basically we were in the jungle with our uniforms rotting off of us. And it was unequal that way. The corruption that went on over there, that the higher-ups had their own system. We again, I felt, were the cannon fodder. We were not given anything. So you build up feelings that goes on with this type of behavior. And the basic feeling is that you are not going to trust anybody up there telling you what to do. You're not going to trust that person until you feel you can. You're not going to just go in and do things because somebody tells you to do them. And that's why I feel fragging did happen. In the latter stages of the Vietnam War, a lot of men, American soldiers, were killing their own officers or maiming their own officers, and that was because of the conditions. Who wants to be the last person to die for nothing?